Tough times are something farmers know well, but by working together, we have always been able to overcome any obstacle, to lift our neighbors up, to put food on each other's tables, to support local businesses, to fight for better policy, and to raise the next generation of family farmers. We were there for you then, and we're here for you now. Join the Farmers Union family at nfu.org/join.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back, and hope that this first ever NFU virtual fly-in is going well for everyone. Today, we will have our congressional briefing, and we are delighted to have a really strong agenda for today's discussion. First up, we will have Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. It will then be followed by a discussion with Chairman Colin Peterson of the House Agriculture Committee. We will also have videos from a host of other strong allies, including Senator Debbie Stabenow, as well as Senator John Tester and Congressman Frank Lucas. And to start off, we are absolutely delighted to have a strong, longtime ally of National Farmers Union to join us here. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob, for the invitation to be here and your kind welcome. It's an honor to virtually welcome the National Farmers Union to your 2020 fly-in. I don't know where you're flying into, but I welcome you to this aspect of it. And if you were here, you would see that I display with great pride the Golden Triangle Award you've given me over the years, and which I have accepted on behalf of the House Democrats, who are just so good on all of this. And our caucus fights hard, as you know, for family farmers and to feed the world under the fabulous leadership of Chairman Colin Peterson. He's a strong leader. He's an intellectual resource, and we learn from him every day. And I know you'll be hearing from him during your Hill Day. Congratulations, President LaRue, on your new role. Your forward-looking leadership ensures diverse voices for farmers from all battlegrounds are heard in Washington, D.C. We welcome that. And I want to especially recognize some Californians, President Joaquin Content and Vice President, that would be President Joaquin Content and Vice President George Davis, all from the National Farmers Union's representatives from California. And a special welcome to my friend, President Aaron Lehman from Iowa Farmers Union. I learned so much on our visit there. Thank you so much for making that possible. Hope we can do that again. Again, you know better than I, but let me pay my respects by saying 118 years, the National Farmers Union has been a champion for our nation's farmers, producers, ranchers, growers, and processors. Your committed advocacy has been essential to advancing a brighter future for rural communities and all Americans. So we're standing up with you. Now we have so many challenges, whether it's fighting the coronavirus and the accompanying economic crisis, ensuring certainty for family farmers hit hard by trade, expanding broadband and biofuels to create good paying jobs and opportunity for all, and improving rural health and more. You know these lists so well. You could, any subject you can name, whether it's rural housing, rural transportation, rural health. There's so many challenges that we can learn from you that we can be doing differently or better. And that's how we learn from the, shall we say, persistent, sometimes impatient direction from Colin Peterson, Mr. Chairman. So with that, I just wanted to welcome you. I just want to say that we do know that COVID has compounded the longstanding challenges in the farm economy while adding more uncertainty and more disruption. Even with record federal payments, food prices are historically high, with families paying more and farmers getting less. There are shortages of products at stores while farmers have excess goods. Rural economies also rely heavily on public sector jobs like state ag agencies as well as manufacturing, while both face unprecedented revenue shortfalls. Issues are coupled with record farm debt, bankruptcies, trade uncertainty, corporate control, no new food and restaurant and school now with these closures. That is why Democrats invested $32.7 billion in the HEROES Act on ag. This is, again, at the direction of the chairman. $915 billion for state and local government. You go look at speaker.gov/HEROES Act and see what this means in your communities, state and local county government. And $75 billion for testing, tracing, and treatment. I truly believe that if we're going to survive this, we have to destroy this virus. We cannot have contempt for science, and that's what some seem to have. We just have to address it by testing, tracing, treatment, mask wearing, social distancing, sanitation, and the rest, and we can contain this. And that way we can open our economy, we can open our schools, and we can do so safely. And again, we listen and learn from you about how we can all do this better to benefit rural communities. I just got off the phone with not a visual, but a virtual nonetheless, meeting with the New Dems. The New Dems are part of the House Democratic Caucus. Many of them represent rural areas. All of them send you their best regards and good wishes for this conference. With that, Rob, I'm pleased to take any questions that you may have.
I think did a good job of outlining many of the challenges that family farmers and the rural communities are faced right now. Many of those challenges that existed pre-pandemic, and certainly the impact that the pandemic has had not only on the food supply, but also throughout all of these communities is really pretty devastating. So appreciate all the work that has already been done. Farmers Union as an organization, as you probably well know, is about bringing people together. That's part of what this week is about. And this week of advocacy is we have 400 farmers and their families who have taken time out of their busy schedules to make sure that they can connect with their members of Congress and engage in discussion so that folks truly understand. And I wondered if you might kind of speak to our members about why it is important at this time for legislators to hear directly from farmers.
Well, thank you. Let me just begin by saying it's really important, and you are our bosses. You are our VIPs. You're in charge. Remember that. And nothing is more eloquent to a member of Congress than the voice of his or her own constituents. Whether you're a senator or a congressperson or whatever your office, your constituents' voices. So when you're coming to talk to your members of Congress, speak directly to your member of Congress. They don't want to hear from somebody else's member, they want to hear from their own. And in a time when, as Rob said, some of these challenges, we know many of these challenges existed before, they're exacerbated by the coronavirus, but also about the natural disasters that are happening. And the climate crisis is a reality, and it hits home for you in a very substantial way, whether it's forest fires in the West destroying 5 million acres or more by now, or the assault on the Gulf Coast of the hurricanes and the devastation that is happening there. The reality of science is that there is a climate crisis and we must act to do something about it. The governor of Louisiana told me the other day, that last week, that this was the fiercest, Laura was the fiercest storm to ever hit Louisiana. So worse than Katrina? Yes. Katrina had a lot of damage from the levees going down, but this was the fiercest storm, and now there's another one on the way. So again, when we're talking about state and local funding to ensure what I talked about before, agriculture agencies and county offices can continue services, the Postal Service, tell them how important the Postal Service is to you when you speak to your members of Congress. Lots of shall we say, live and seed treasures in the mail that for whom time is a very important determination of getting there quickly. You know, we have that, as I said, $32 billion, $0.7 billion investment in the farm community, not the CCC, different from that. And the OSHA standards are important too for workers who are essential and need to go to work. So for these and other reasons, people have to hear from you because there's so many challenges, and how you prioritize them is really important to your member of Congress. And remember, you're the boss. Nothing more eloquent than your voice to a member of Congress. So thank you for what you are doing. We can maneuver all we want here with legislation, language, and this and this and this, but the outside mobilization that you bring to this is absolutely essential. That we need to know, what does this mean to you?
Well, critical point, and appreciate those remarks. Kind of building back on your reference to the important work that the House did in passing the HEROES Act, in that, you know, additional package of resources to help state and local and farming communities out there. You know, very large, comprehensive package, and certainly we've seen some effort in the Senate to move. It's a little bit much more uncertain what that looks like. Wondered if you might speak just a minute about what you see as a potential pathway through to get that next round of assistance through both the House and the Senate.
Your visit to Washington, D.C., I'm pinning my hopes on you. It is important. It is important for people in the country to know who's here in their interest. We don't want this to be partisan at all. We've had 4 bills on the COVID challenge, all of them overwhelmingly bipartisan. They didn't start out that way, but they did end that way because we knew we had to, they knew, because they were their bills, that they knew they had to come our way on in order to meet the needs of people. And that means small businesses as well, and many small businesses, many of you farmers are in small business as well. The sad part of it is that in the country, people are so consumed in the fear of the virus, the thought, the concern about their children going to school, the economic impact on them, natural disasters, and they're really not paying attention to who said what in Washington, D.C. So what gives me hope is that as we go forward and we're saying this has to be in the bill and this is why. This is very scientifically, institutionally, academically documented to be what is needed here. So that people say, oh, Washington is dysfunctional because it doesn't do this or that. No, we know exactly why these particular amounts are in the bill. And since then, 4 months ago, we did the bill and Mitch McConnell pressed the pause button. Since then, over 5 million people have been infected, over 100,000 have died. But apart from that, we've missed opportunities to help people. Everybody tells us, the chairman of the Fed, other Fed officers around the country, Federal Reserve officers around the country have said, we need a big infusion of resources into our communities, into our businesses, into our state and local government. So we have to bring more clarity as to the pathetic nature of the Senate bill. I'm so proud not one Democrat voted for it. Did it have a couple good things there? Yeah, but it fell so short of meeting the needs of the American people. You can't have a skinny deal. A skinny deal is a Republican deal. That means they get what they want and the American people get shortchanged. You have to have a massive problem met by massive response to it or initiation of issues to it. So again, know your power. You're coming, you're weighing in, you're saying this is what we need. And again, no partisanship, it's about patriotism and it's about saving the lives, the livelihood, and quite frankly, the life of our democracy with some of the other things they are trying to do in these bills that are, shall we say, not in furtherance of the spirit of our country, our fair elections, our postal system, our census, and the rest.
Thank you. One part of the HEROES Act actually provides some direct assistance to the biofuel sector. Another one of those industries that's been hit really hard over the last few years, actually by decisions by the administration to grant waivers to large oil companies, and really kind of reducing demand, which has a direct impact not only on the ethanol plants out there, many of whom are owned by family farmers and their communities, but the impact this has throughout those communities, and has a really negative impact on corn prices out there. So it's really a kind of a 1-2 punch. The pandemic had its own, obviously reduced demand for fuels out there. And again, we have decisions by the administration that have really been struggling. Can you speak just a minute? You've been a longtime supporter of biofuels industry, and what this means to you.
Well, I believe in it. I believe in it, and I know more about it because of Colin, that's for sure. But I thank you all for the courage that you have to be so entrepreneurial and going down this path. It is, we at Democrats, and we try to do this in a bipartisan way, understand the urgent needs, again, to bolster good paying jobs. And this is such an important part of that. And that's why we will this week take up a bill, pretty soon we will vote, I don't know if it'll be this week or next, vote on a bill that includes Chairman Peterson's Renewable Fuel Standard Integrity Act. As you know, there are two actions that happened in the last 24 to 36 hours. One was the GAO report on farm payments that we found seriously lacking, that farmers are harmed by the president's trade turmoil, ultimately created by deep regional inequities, and favoring some crops over another. But the one that is apropos of what we're talking about here is the EPA rule. I mean, they are giving waivers where they shouldn't. We have to stop that. That isn't even right. That isn't even right. And we know the pandemic has had a devastating effect on the biofuels industry. Fewer drivers means less demand for biofuels. HEROES Act included direct assistance for the biofuels industry, as you know, and it provided $3 billion in emergency assistance to biofuel producers to ensure stability. And it goes on, which provides certainty to corn, soy, other growers, and nearly 350,000 biofuel workers in good paying jobs in farm communities. And then when they came up with the Trump's EPA granting 3 times as many small refinery exemptions, SREs, you know them, from the renewable fuel standard blending requirements. SREs are designed to be available to small refineries that can prove they are in financial strife. However, last year, as you know, the EPA granted waivers to any small refinery who applied, even owned by Exxon and Chevron, as you indicated, some of them, and regardless of financial hardship. So in the eyes of most biofuel producers, EPA has used the waivers to thwart the primary goal of the RFS to increase the use of renewable fuels. And again, we've come together in a bipartisan way on some of these issues. Sometimes we've even had to fight Democrats on some of these issues who didn't fully understand. But it was hard enough fight to get the standard. Another thing for them to give waivers to it in such a broad way. But that's what elections are about. So when Chairman Peterson's Renewable Fuel Standard Integrity Act will be included in part of our energy packages that we put forth before we leave here. So that'll be soon.
Yeah, well, thank you. And For Farmers Union, we are not only proud of our support for biofuels, but we feel like it is very much a big part of our overall climate message. And Farmers Union is proud to be aggressive about making sure that farmers have a seat at the table. They are among the first to feel the impacts of the changing climate. And you made reference earlier to the natural disasters that are certainly becoming more intense and more frequent. And we all know the impact that that has on crops and on, quite frankly, the future livelihood of our members and future generations here. And was wondering if you might speak for just a minute about what you see as the pathway or the framework for climate legislation as we look ahead even into the next Congress. What that might look like, and maybe a comparison about where we are now versus where we were back in 2009 with the last kind of comprehensive climate package.
Well, thank you for that question. Before I go into it, though, I do want to say that in addition to all of the concerns that we have, not in addition to, because you've referenced this, but to emphasize, rural hospitals are really at risk in what's happening in terms of the assault on the Affordable Care Act, for one, or ignoring some of our investments that we have in the HEROES Act and the rest to save some of the hospitals. And when we turn our back on rural hospitals, we're turning back on the good health of people there. We cannot let that happen. If you don't have a hospital in your region, how do you expect to attract people and talent and business and the rest if there's not a way for children to be educated or healthcare to be provided? And so rural health is a big issue in our caucus, and with an emphasis on rural hospitals. And this weekend, I just had the privilege of hosting the G7 heads of parliament. As you all know, probably every year, the heads of state meet, the G7 heads of state meet. It rotates from one country to the next each year. What you probably don't know is that at that same time, a month later or so, is the G7 heads of parliament. And I had the privilege of hosting that this weekend, virtually, of course, as we are here. The speakers from each of the parliaments, and as well as the European Union. The lead from our House was taken by Kathy Castor, who's the head of the Select Committee, and she is advancing legislation that is about climate change. Now, her committee is not a legislative committee; it's making recommendations to other committees. And at the table, she has everyone. She has farmers, she has corporate America, she has business, and she has labor, and she has environs, she has health, she has people of faith and scientists, not that they're exclusive of each other, but nonetheless, every view represented. Venture capitalists to see what the marketplace will be for what we want to go forward and do. Just everybody at the table. It's an enormous table. And she put forth a report that is getting acclaimed as the most valuable report ever put forth in the Congress of the United States, and that will turn into legislation. When we did ours before, we were able to do the biggest energy bill in the history of our country under President Bush. He wanted nuclear, I wanted renewables. We made an agreement, and it was like taking millions of cars off the road. But you in farm country take the earliest bite of the wormy apple of the climate crisis. You see it early on in terms of flora and fauna. You see it in terms of how it impacts weather in farm country. And these natural disasters, of course, hit hard into rural America, and they are connected to climate change. There is no question about that. So we put forth one product already of her bill, which is called Moving Forward. And this is our legislation for infrastructure and transportation. It's about $1.5 trillion. The president said he'd be willing to go to $2 trillion, but we haven't seen them since we came out with $1.5 trillion. And it's about roads and bridges, surface transportation. It's about water. It's about some of our systems are over 100 years old, made of brick and wood. Would you like a glass of water from that? And it's about broadband, rural broadband, big, like 80-some billion dollars for broadband. Rural, in addition to some urban deserts, but the rural broadband thing is the real breakthrough. And it also has a big chunk of resources for building school construction, so that children are going to schools that are wired for the future and ventilated to protect their health, and housing as well. So it is comprehensive in terms of going from roads and bridges and broadband and the rest to other forms of infrastructure. And that is going to be done in a resilient, green way. And we see it as not only a job creator, but we see it as an entrepreneurial measure so that people can gain equity as they try to compete for grants or contracts when we go forward with all of this. We have the Native American community involved in it as well, because they have been good stewards of the land, and we wanted them to be, their sensitivities to be reflected in how we go forward. I call it to your attention. Perhaps later we can text you the title of it. I think if you saw it, you would see it is transformative, and it is essential for our Save the Planet. We see it as a jobs issue. Well, first of all, we see it as a health issue: clean air, clean water for our children. And then we see it as a jobs issue, and a way to channel the energies of all of us in an entrepreneurial way, or as we build the infrastructure, create good paying jobs as we go forward, and to be preeminent in the world with green technologies. We see it as a national security issue. National security generals, whatever diplomats, national security advisors tell us, this is a national security issue. Rising sea levels, encroachment of deserts, drying up of rivers, you name it, the melting of our solar caps and the rest, the thermal management of the planet, all disrupted by this. It will cause a loss of habitat and loss of resources. You can't farm if there's a drought, will be migration, all kinds of things that can cause conflict and competition that is not safe. So, and there's fourth, health, jobs, security, and our values. If you believe as do I that this is God's creation, we have a moral responsibility to be good stewards of it. Or even if you don't, you just believe that we owe it to our children, as do I, to pass the plan on in a serious way, that we have that responsibility. So it will be at the top of it has always been at the top of our agenda. We've already passed the moving forward bill. I would hope that it should be something the president would support, because he's always talked about infrastructure. But nonetheless, 4 months from now and a couple of days, we'll have a new president of the United States. I know this isn't a political call, but I'm just saying civically, the reality is, if we do our job, that will happen. And climate will be not denied. Climate change will not be denied, but in fact, it will be, science will be respected. If science were not held in contempt, we'd be in better shape on COVID. If science were not held in contempt, we'd be in better shape on climate. I'm glad that it's a priority for you. And we look to foreign country for guidance on this, because again, you see it, a lot of it first. And that's really important for us to know as we do public policy in relationship to it. So I'm glad that's on your agenda as you speak to members of Congress. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I actually just have one additional question, and then if your time permits, we'd like to have a few questions from some of our members who are joining us today on here. But you made reference to the Postal Service earlier, and certainly for a lot of our members that either depend upon supplies, other critical services, for including live chicks, for example, going through the mail. I think that's been a surprise to a lot of folks that, you know, the services that the Postal Service provides to all of these rural areas And the reductions in service has really had an impact in some areas, and there's a great deal of concern about whether or not those reductions will continue and what the future might hold. And so was wondering if you could speak to what it is that we as an organization and members in these rural communities can do to help support a strong and ongoing U.S. Postal Service.
I thank you for that, Rob. I don't think that this should be the easiest thing we all have to do, because the Postal Service enjoys such popularity in our country, over 90% favorable. No agency of government, or public or private, even beyond government, enjoys that kind of popularity. It is an all-American institution, as American as apple pie, baseball, motherhood, you name it. As old as our country, Benjamin Franklin was the first Postmaster General. Before we were colonies, when we had a postal service, we became a country, brought people together. And now there's an attempt to cut those ties. And it's a health issue. Even before coronavirus, it was a health issue. Last year, 2019, 1.2 billion prescriptions went through the mail. 1.2 billion percent. Over 80–90% of medicine sent from the VA to veterans goes through the mail. You mentioned, and so it was a health issue then, more so now in the time of coronavirus. You mentioned chicks, I mentioned seed earlier, equipment. Rural America really, my understanding is, really depends on the Postal Service. And many of our seniors who live in rural areas, it's a kind of a double whammy, depend on the Postal Service. Even though we communicate like this, we also have to communicate in other ways in terms of information, as well as product getting to market or to farmers and families. So again, just when you're talking to them, just say, understand how important the Postal Service is. Now, we had a Postal Service a few weeks ago, a Postal Service Day of Action all over the country, hundreds of events with members of Congress in the lead, all Democrats, but we invited the Republicans, but they said we were making up the issue. There was no concern about the Postal Service. Of course, they're doing this because they want to undermine vote by mail. So in order to undermine vote by mail, they want to dismantle the Postal Service. But it's been part of their agenda for a while to privatize the Postal Service so somebody can make money off of it. And we cannot let that happen. This is a service. When people say, well, they had a shortfall, they had lost some money. Yeah, it's a service. And it most, by and large, pays for itself. And we should subsidize the service to the American people. This brings us together as a country. So we passed the Delivering for America Act to prohibit implementing any changing and providing the $25 billion to the Postal Service. That was the amount that was recommended by the Board of Governors of the U.S. Postal Service. The Board of Governors is bipartisan, and it is 100% appointed by Donald Trump. So this was not our number, this was their number. And still our Republican colleagues voted against it. But we cannot let them, we have very serious concerns about the Postmaster General as well. But the fact is, if people weigh in and say, we need to keep let me just say this one thing, just you're business people, most of you. Supposing, as they have said to the Postal Service a number of years ago, you have to pay for 75 years of health benefits in 10 years. Could you handle that? I mean, that's an impossible task when we're trying to undo that. But no wonder there's a shortfall of funds if you're paying for 75 years of health care in 10 years. So we've made it hard for them. Let's make it easier, and let's give them the resources they need to meet our needs. Support the Postal Service.
Thank you for that. Keeping an eye on the time here, we want to be respectful. We've really appreciated the generous time you've done. I might try to combine some questions that we've been receiving from folks related in some ways to the impact on much of the food supply, but in particular the meat supply that occurred in the pandemic. What we ended up with was a situation where consumers weren't able to get food for a while. Farmers were receiving very low prices, and in a very concentrated market, the companies were walking away with, lots of profit. And we also had huge problems with COVID in some of the plants. I mean, there were just challenges that were brought on by the pandemic, but really kind of highlighted some of the systematic problems that we have in the food industry right now. And, the issue is complex, but what steps would you guess that Congress could take to ensure a more reliable meat processing is available, not only to farmers, but make sure there's also a safe workplace for those in these plants, and obviously all to the benefit, hopefully, of the consumer out there. It was a real challenge that really pitted, it created, damage to consumers and those who are food insecure. And at the other end, farmers and independent ranchers out there really devastated with huge, enormous losses.
I thank you for presenting that. And again, I feel like saying to Colin Peterson, tell Rob what you tell me, because he describes this challenge on a regular basis to all of us. Let me just back up for a moment and say, when we did the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, the concerns of Farm America were, of course, very important to us, because we weren't too happy with some of the moves that were being made by the administration. And Colin, others weighed in about it, whether it was dairy. You're talking about meat now, but whether it was dairy, this or that. In fact, I talked to the speaker from Canada the other day about dairy, and still would like them to do more in that regard. So some of our trade relationships have some to do with it. For example, one of the big, my understanding is that Smithfield, where some of the cases of coronavirus took place, is owned by the Chinese. My understanding is also that the Chinese own the hogs. You're not supposed to own the hogs if you're processing, whatever. I mean, again, this is new territory for me to be knowing what the standards should be, but have not been honored. So I do think that you bring up an important point about it being safe for people to go to work in the processing plants too. They just resolved a case where there were like maybe say 1,000 people infected, several people died, and the settlement was $13,000. I mean, really? So when we tell people they're essential and they have to go to work, we have to make it safe for them to go to work. We do want to protect the employer. So if they honor the OSHA standards, which we have to elevate because we're in a more dangerous situation now, that would hold them in good stead, as should there be the virus attacking some of the workers. But you can't say to workers, you're essential, you go to work regardless of whether there are precautions taken or not. You get sick, you have no recourse. And if you don't go to work in one of these processing plants, you do not get unemployment insurance. So why don't we just look at what is our purpose? Our purpose is to feed the world and feed America. To do so, we need to have respect for every step of the way. You are not just farmers, you're processors and the rest. And to do so in a way that takes it home to people. How do we get the prices that farmers deserve? Not high food cost out here, low return to farmers. Who thought that was a good idea? How does that work? Is that the free market system? What does that relate to? So again, when we're talking about public policy, we have to look to how our decisions exacerbate or not a situation like that. And I said I could have no better mentor on all of this than Colin Peterson. Sometimes he gets impatient with us for not knowing it from the start. But then again, we don't dare forget once he tells us. When I was chair of the California Democratic Party over 30 years ago, one of the things I instituted in the party was a rural caucus. Coming from San Francisco, we only had one farm in San Francisco. It was a mushroom farm. That's it. But we did know that the economy of our state, and not only our state, our country depended on a thriving agricultural economy in terms of our balance of trade and all of that. And I wanted the urban folks in California to understand the importance of the rural California to our state and our country, and it's a big toller. So when we're talking about environmental issues or all kinds of other issues, there would be some understanding and some, shall we say, negotiation and collaboration on how to get the job done. So coming from an agricultural state myself, and again, many of the financial institutions in my state, in my city, were connected to the ag community as well. So, and I don't know, it seems like everybody I know has some interest in rural California in terms of family connection, or that's where they grew up, but it's a real loyalty to the wholesomeness of it all, and that applies across the country. So again, how we can deal, Rob, you put out quite a challenge, and we have to, as we do public policy, do the best we can to have something that is sustainable, that people will respect and honor, but also, again, is bold enough to get the job done. I look forward to hearing from you on all of these scores. I feel very blessed that Colin is leading our effort here, and that we can make it better and take some of the uncertainty out of what you all do. So I've been to Iowa on the farm, I've been to Minnesota, I've been many places to hear directly from farmers who told me they were on food stamps. They were on food stamps, or farmers on food stamps. That was in Iowa. And then on another trip to Iowa, we had our round table where I learned so much that I mentioned earlier with Mr. Larson. So let's keep the communication going. And again, know your power, and we to our peril, our country just makes it a business transaction without recognizing that it's not just about that, it's about the value of our farm community, that small businesses thrive and create jobs, and families have had them for years, and that we listen to you, not just about farm issues, but about health issues and other issues, and about the climate crisis. I want to refer you to climatecrisis.house.gov is where you can go to get our report on the climate crisis that my colleague Kathy Castor led the way on, but had the involvement of many members of Congress, and also now we've shared it with our colleagues in the G7. Trade is also a challenge, and again, we look to Colin for his leadership on that. I was pleased that we were able to do U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, but we had to do it to make it more sensitive to U.S. concerns. So again, just sharing some thoughts with you, hearing your questions, wishing you success with your conference. And again, I know you have a full agenda, so I will thank you for the time afforded to me to share some thoughts with you, pay my respects. And again, can't wait to where we go next. Hopefully it'll be soon, and it will be well defined, and we can put our heads together to have the best possible policy as we go forward. And the more the public knows about it, the more success we can have. Remember, you're the boss. You're the boss. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Speaker, for all of your remarks today, for your support in the past, and for continuing to allow farmers, family farmers, to have a seat at the table in future discussions there. It's critically important to us, and we know that you recognize that. So thank you again for all of your time today.
And Rob, thank you for your leadership. Congratulations to you on your new job. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I certainly would first do another shout out to everybody who has been having meetings so far with your members of Congress. I've heard really good reports from most of those conversations. Hopefully they've been really useful to you. I am certain that it is bringing value to the legislators themselves. But as we continue the discussion here with congressional leaders, at this time, it is my honor and delight to welcome to our discussion Chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, Colin Peterson, who has represented the Northwest District of Minnesota for many years and really is the leader on Capitol Hill on all things agriculture, has been a leader on many farm bills in the past, and is prepared to take your questions. We'll have a few questions for him and give him a chance to share his thoughts on current challenges and where we go from here. So Colin.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
But I think my video is not working here for some reason.
Well, we can hear you well.
Yeah, so I don't know why it's not working. There we go.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yep.
I think I got a lot of backlight here. I don't know, but can you guys deal with it?
Yes, we can.
Maybe if I turn this way a little bit. How's that? Is that better?
Yep. We've all had to learn how to do this, so.
All right. Well, I listened to some of the conversation you had with the speaker, and I won't go over all that again. And I'm not in the room with a lot of what she's dealing with. I want to give her credit for listening to me and putting the provisions in the HEROES Act that I felt were necessary for agriculture, and how we're going to work this out at the end of the day. That's above my pay grade. That's her her job. But I've had a chance to sit down with her and explain to her the problems that we have in agriculture. We're in the middle of a farm bill, and so we don't have another farm bill coming up until 2023. So one of the things that I'm focusing on right now is supply chain. We found all kinds of things exposed by the coronavirus and what happened, as the speaker said, with people getting sick within the plants, and plants either shutting down or slowing down, and the effect that had on the farm. And I've had discussions with people in all the different aspects of production and processing about this, and we are in the process of looking at this in the future. And for example, I've spent quite a bit of time with the pork producers, and frankly, the pork producers are too efficient. And what happened here is they were so efficient that everything had to kind of fall in place in order for everything to be work out okay. And when the plants shut down, all of a sudden things backed up, and they had hogs that were ready to go to market that couldn't go to market, and we had to depopulate, and just all kinds of problems that were caused out there, especially in my district. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we avoid something like this in the future? So, we have the authority within USDA to deal with sick animals, sick birds. But the Secretary claims he doesn't have the authority to deal with sick people. And so he doesn't feel like, and he had the authority to help people with this depopulation, with what happened to us, like he did in 2015 with avian influenza, which also affected my district. So one of the things I'm trying to do is give him the authority in the future to deal with something like this, even if it affects humans, and that affects us as opposed to animals. So that, if I have my way, that will be available and will be authority given to the secretary so that he could use the CCC to come in and help alleviate the situation. So we're looking at trying to figure out how to do this. We're looking at other aspects. We know that we're told that we're going to have African swine fever. We're told it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. The Chinese, lost over half of their hog herd to this. And we've done a good job so far of keeping it out of the country, but people tell me that they'll be surprised if we're able to keep it out altogether. So foot and mouth disease and avian influenza. So what I want to try to do is work with the department, work in the Congress to come up with a plan for all of these different scenarios. And not just a study that sits on the shelf, like I found they had for African swine fever. They have a study that they put together, but the rules are not written. The funding is not identified. Those things are not in place. And so what I want to do is set this up so that is done ahead of time. So if we have some kind of catastrophe that happens, whether it's a pandemic or some kind of animal disease or outbreak or whatever it is, we don't have to be scrambling around trying to write rules, trying to figure out where we're going to get money. It's already done. So the rules are written, the money is identified out of the CCC. So if something happens the next day, we can go in there and start dealing with it. So that's one of the things we're working on right now. We also have some bills that have been introduced to try to add processing capacity, especially in the meat industry. It's a terrible situation to have just 4 big companies controlling most of this situation. And, what troubles me about this, it seems like people in the United States don't want to own processing. The hedge funds, the private equity funds, money people, this is not a business they want to be in. So they've sold these businesses to foreigners. So now JBS and Smithfield and the Brazilians and the Chinese own more of this processing than Americans. And this is not a good situation, and it shouldn't be how things are in the United States. So one of the other things I'm looking into, how can we attract American capital to provide other choices for farmers? What happened in southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, with what happened with these plants, there just was no other options. There was no place for them to take their animals, and so it backed the whole thing up. So we're looking into that, and we're also looking into, can we do something at the federal level to start more small, federally inspected plants, that can be available to people. At one time in Minnesota, we had a number of plants that you could send your livestock to 20, 30 years ago. And now, in some areas, you got 1, maybe 2. So that's got to change, So these are the kind of things that the committee is looking at right now, that I've been spending a lot of time talking to people about. Next year, maybe the second half of next Congress, we will start looking at the Farm Bill, and we'll start having field hearings. But I'd rather focus on these other problems first and try to figure out how we can fund all of this. I mean, if we're going to get more processing plants, we have to get more federal inspectors, and that costs money. And one of the big problems we have in agriculture is that we don't have, in the Ag Committee, money to fund these things. We can't just go in and spend money like they're spending out of the CCC. Somebody asked me last night, what I thought Vice President Biden could do to win over farm country. And I facetiously said, well, he could go find $60 billion to send out to the farmers, and that might help. So they can take this money out of the CCC. They can not pay for it. They can just add it to the debt. And, I'm not saying that farmers don't need this money, but, I'm not sure all of it was spent exactly the way it should. There were things that were left out, things that were missed, things that dates were wrong. And frankly, the administration did not work with us on these programs. So, the facilitation program, the CFAP program, were basically done without much consultation from anybody in Congress. So, we have to figure out how we can come up with money to help do the kinds of things we need to do in agriculture. We still have commodity prices that are too low. We got farmers not making any money. Without these government payments, we'd be in big hurt, So we've developed a safety net for dairy that is effective, and I am very proud of. And I would say dairy now has the best safety net of any part of agriculture because of the work it took 10 years to do to finally get everybody on the same page. But we now have a safety net underneath revenue for farms under 5 million pounds, about 220 cows, where you can buy at an affordable level, you can buy coverage that you can go to your banker and say, no matter what happens in the marketplace, I know I'm going to be able to get this much revenue. And that revenue is probably pretty close to the cost of production. That's a big change from where we were. We also have revenue insurance available above that. So if we could get safety net for the rest of agriculture like we were able to put together for dairy, I'd feel a lot more comfortable about things. So, we've looked at how can we improve this situation. I saw there were some questions on here about CRP. The last time we had a big problem with pricing in the 80s, if you remember, we got out of it by CRP. We put 45 million acres into CRP, took it out of production, and it fixed the price problem. Now, the last farm bill went from 24 to 27 million acres, but if we keep oversupplying the market, it's probably the best and cheapest way to take care of the oversupply and most politically feasible way of doing it. And you get a lot of other benefits out of the side. You get benefits of, like people said here, soil health, wildlife, water quality, all kinds of other benefits come out of CRP if it's done correctly. So we are looking at that whole program and what we can do to make it better and more affordable, and whether this is something to fit into the next farm bill. So we're keeping busy. We have, a very new committee in a way. A lot of the members on the Democratic side are brand new. And so we've been doing educating, and we've been running the committee on a bottom-up basis. So we've been running the committee at subcommittee level. I'm doing that on purpose so that the members can have more exposure and more ability to become experts on these things, which you don't get if you're in full committee. And so we're plugging away and doing the best we can. We appreciate the Farmers Union and all of your work and your attention to what's going on with family farm agriculture, and we'll do what we can to help, but we can't always do everything you guys want us to do. We'll do the best we can.
I think that's a fair way to put it. If I might just ask you kind of a follow-up there, just to speak briefly about some of the other areas you talked about, the efforts in the kind of particularly in the meat sector that you're trying to do to kind of help prevent future problems and address some of the underlying problems. but you've also had recent bills on broadband and also the RFS and biofuels. I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit about that.
Well, the president finally, after we put some heat on him, has finally told them no on these stopgap waivers, which should have never even been an issue in the first place. You know, I'm getting tired of solving problems that were created by the administration in the first place. These waivers never were justified. You know, I was there in 07 when we did the RFS, and we took this language on hardship waivers. We were promised it was only going to be small refineries, and it was only going to be when there was actual hardships. So what happened? That was fine until Obama left office. But now with this administration, we're giving out waivers to ExxonMobil and, you know, people that are clearly not small refineries, and it's undermined the market. We were promised at the end of the day, which we should have had last year, 15 billion gallons of ethanol, corn ethanol, and we're at about 12 and a half because of these waivers. So, you know, you know, they've stopped that, and they want to say, well, we're going to allow Iran and E15, or we're going to authorize E15 in every gas station in America. That sounds good, but it gets us very little, because there are so many issues before E15 becomes a viable part of the marketplace. You got 2 rules in EPA to get over. You got the state fire marshals. You got the underwriting laboratories. You got, you know, all these other people involved in this. You got the convenience stores themselves. You know, and in Minnesota, we've done, you know, fairly good, better than any other state in terms of E15, but it's still only a small part of the marketplace, you know, so it's good and it's positive, but anybody thinks this E15 is going to solve this problem, you know, you're kidding yourselves, you know, so that's one thing. And so I've got a bill that would take on these waivers further and say that if you're going to give out a waiver, you got to tell us why you gave it out, the amount of it, and the reason for it, you know, the reasoning behind it. And they will not give us this information, which is unbelievable. So we're going to try to force that into whatever final package we have. And the other question you had was about broadband. Okay, well, you know, we have spent so much money on broadband that has been wasted that I am sick and tired of this. You know, we spent a whole bunch of money in the back when they did the last collapse in 2008 or 9. They did $9 billion for broadband. It mostly was used to overbuild existing systems. And one of the things I've been trying to do is say that any money that we appropriate for rural broadband has to go where there is no service, because that's, you know, and so Don Young and I have a bill that we've been pushing for a while to take the Universal Service Fund, which is how we got telephones in rural America, you know, and take that and transfer it from landlines to broadband. So believe it or not, we are still giving telephone companies subsidies based on landlines, when most people don't have landlines anymore. They're using cell phones, you know, and some of these companies are fighting us on this because they get more money by doing this than they do actually promoting broadband. So Don and I we think that until we can get the Universal Service Fund and get everybody that's on the internet paying for this, we're never going to get enough money to actually make this happen. And so we're pushing that because now, in this day and age, if you don't have high-speed internet, you know, in agriculture in rural America, you're in big trouble, you know. And this pandemic has proved that you can work from home if you have high-speed internet, and people would prefer to live in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, as opposed to Washington D.C. if they, you know, they've got the internet. So we're working on that as well. But the one thing I'm trying to do is take the language that's in the current statute, which says underserved, and get rid of that and just say unserved until we get this thing out to every farm in America. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, well, thanks. And obviously, thanks so much for your generous time today. Several of the issues that you've touched on, and even the bills that you've introduced, are ones that our members are pushing in their conversations this week. So it's really good to see, obviously, your ongoing leadership. And I think, for folks who may not have been familiar with you, understand kind of the breadth of knowledge that you bring to the table here. And it was also echoed by Speaker Pelosi. So Colin, Chairman Peterson, thank you for your time today. I know it's been a real value to our members.
Well, thank you. And thank you for your leadership and support over the years, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
All righty. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn to a couple of messages that are pre-recorded from some of our allies that were unable to join us today live, but they do have videos relatively short here that I think would be of value for folks to watch. The first one is from Senator Debbie Stabenow, who's the senior senator from Michigan and the ranking member of the Senate Agriculture Committee. She served in that leadership role during the 2014 and 2018 farm bills, and she's been a strong advocate for specialty crop producers, local food systems, and conservation programs. She also works on clean water issues and is the co-chair of the bipartisan Great Lakes Task Force and a longtime proponent of affordable health care. At this time, let's hear a message from Senator Stabenow.
Hi to everyone taking part in the National Farmers Union virtual fly-in. I wish we were together. I especially want to say hello to my friends from Michigan. Between low crop prices, a lack of support for biofuels from this administration, unequal payments from the USDA, chaos in our trade policies, and concerns about keeping workers safe during harvest. All of these things are huge challenges facing you. From the start, I've been very concerned that the Trump administration trade payments have picked winners and losers and left small farms behind. This week, the nonpartisan Government Accountability Office released a new report that confirms that the USDA has not treated farmers fairly. I want to say a thank you to Gary Wordish, the president of the Minnesota Farmers Union, who joined me and others in a press call to discuss the findings of the GAO report and the impact on growers. We're also seeing unequal treatment in the USDA COVID-19 relief program. In the CARES Act, Congress provided the USDA $9.5 billion, as you know, to help farmers experiencing financial losses from COVID-19, including targeted support for fruit and vegetable growers, dairy, livestock farmers, and local food producers. USDA has yet to provide adequate payments to some of these producers, and I remain very concerned that many crops will continue to be totally excluded. And this is not right. As farmers continue to face COVID-19 related losses this fall, I am fighting on your behalf to support a fair process for you and a fair process for our families as well, who are so desperately in need of what you produce. I'm pushing for USDA to dedicate resources to help farmers based on need. And I introduced the Food Supply Protection Act, which will help fill the gaps in the broken food supply chain, reduce food waste, and help farmers, workers, processors, food banks, and families. So as we head into the fall, I just want you to know I continue to be very proud to be your partner. We've got a lot to do to make sure that we are strengthening agriculture in rural communities. Enjoy the conference.
All righty. We thank Senator Stabenow for those remarks. At this point, would introduce the speaker for our next video message. That is another very strong ally of National Farmers Union, Senator Jon Tester of Montana. He's a third-generation farmer from near Big Sandy and is the only working farmer in the Senate. Senator Tester is on the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee and is a vocal advocate for agriculture and rural issues, including livestock markets, country of origin labeling, small business development, and trade, and continues to lead in all of those areas. So at this time, a message from Senator Tester.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to share a few words with you today. A big thanks to the National Farmers Union for putting on this event. It's great that even in these uncertain times, we're still able to connect and discuss the issues that are so critical to family farms and ranches in production ag. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but the market we farmers and ranchers are seeing today isn't a good one. Small family farms have suffered from unnecessary trade wars, for low commodity prices, from climate change, and now a pandemic and economic crisis. The current rules of the road favor big ag corporations and incentivize consolidation at the expense of family producers, who at the end of days' hard work hold their breath in hopes that they'll have enough money left in the bank to be able to survive another year. Grain prices have been stagnant for years. Meat packers are taking advantage of ranchers, and climate change is hurting our very way of life. And on top of that, we're now staring a global public health and economic crisis in the face that is devastating small towns across this country. The truth of the matter is that Congress needs to act. We need to be pushing for legislation that will reform the way livestock producers do business so that we can give ranchers and small and medium-sized feeders more ability to negotiate fair prices at the auction block. We also need to be expanding services like rural broadband and health care so that folks in rural America are able to access critical resources amid this COVID-19 pandemic. But unfortunately, the Senate isn't doing much of anything to help because Mitch McConnell refused to work across the aisle to get things done. Instead of taking up bipartisan legislation to protect the Postal Service or combat cattle market price manipulation or do something about the consolidation in production in agribusiness, he rather is focused on creating slush funds and liability protections for big corporations. Now that doesn't work for those of us who call rural America home. These common sense moves could ensure that you can continue to do what you love to do, feed the world. And our most successful policies are the ones we make when we listen to folks like you, the folks who are on the ground. After all, my Seeding Rural Resilience Act, which recently passed both the House and the Senate, has been successful in large part because of your support. Soon, rural communities will have more tools in their belts to address the rising rate of farmer suicides. By the way, that could also be fixed with some fair commodity prices. Thank you again for all that you do to keep food on the table for families across our country. And just know that I appreciate your work and know that my door is always open.
Alrighty, we thank Senator Tester for his past leadership and future efforts, and I know that he will continue to be a strong ally for us. Our final video message today is from yet another ally, Representative Frank Lucas of Oklahoma. Congressman Lucas is a fifth-generation Oklahoman who represents the state's 3rd congressional district, which covers nearly half the state and key agricultural areas. Representative Lucas is a former chairman of the House Agriculture Committee and currently serves on the House Committee on Financial Services, as well as the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. So at this time, a message from Congressman Lucas.
Hello, my name's Frank Lucas. I have the privilege of representing the 3rd District of Oklahoma, the northwest half of the great state. And along with a number of my friends, a longtime veteran of the House Agriculture Committee. Let's visit for a few minutes about some of the most pressing issues affecting not only my constituents and neighbors in Oklahoma, but farmers and ranchers across the country. Right now in particular, I'd like to talk about the livestock situation. I know we are still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I realize that that's caused great hardships for consumers, but it's also caused tremendous hardship for producers, the people who raise the livestock that go through the processing plants that ultimately wind up in the restaurants or the grocery stores. A lot of my folks back home say with great sincerity that there are problems out there in how the system works, that producers are not getting a fair price, that consumers are not being able to buy food at a fair price, and they point to the middle of the chain. There's a lot of truth in that. Now first, think about COVID-19, how it affected this ultra-efficient food delivery system we have in the United States of America. Just in time, just super efficient, just a handful of facilities turning all of the steers and the heifers and the hogs and the chickens into the wonderful products we consume in the restaurant and at home. When we had that slow down, and in some places closure of the processing plants, it literally caused a crash price for those of us who raise livestock. And it also saw the price of food consumed by our neighbors in town explode through the roof. That's not just a one-time problem. We saw that in Colorado a year ago with a fire at a major packing plant in the beef industry. So how do we respond to that? I'm working with a number of my colleagues in a bipartisan way to try and make the system more efficient. Yes, protect producers and consumers at the same time. And how do we go about that? Oh, and remember the most recent statistics from 2017, almost 83%, for instance, of the beef is processed by 4 major companies in the United States. That's a huge concentration of assets and processing. So how do we address that? Well, part of it goes from who owns the packing plants. My colleague from Ohio, Congresswoman Fudge, and I have introduced a bill to add agriculture to the subject matters subject to the CFIUS board. This is a group that's existed since the 1970s to say when a foreign entity wants to come in and buy a major asset, an industry in the United States, that it has to be cleared to make sure it doesn't impact national security. Most people think of defense or aerospace or telecommunications. We have a bill that we're working hard on to add food to that. So if an entity from outside the United States wants to buy a packer or a major slice of the packing industry or the food processing industry, they'd have to be cleared, and we put the Secretary of Agriculture on that board to oversee it. That's a step in the right direction. I'm also working with my old colleague and friend off the Agriculture Committee, Colin Peterson, on something called the Ramp-Up Act. How do you make sure that small and intermediate plants can compete with the big operators? Well, one of the issues here involves federal inspection. In the United States, we have state and federal inspection of meat both. I would tell you any steak, any pork chop, any item you buy in Oklahoma that's been state inspected is just as safe and as healthy and as wholesome as anything inspected by the federal government. But if you're going to sell it across state lines, if you're going to sell it in international markets, you've got to have that USDA inspected stamp on it. And Ramp Up creates a program to provide grants to small packers to upgrade their facilities so they can qualify for USDA federal inspection. And if they don't meet the qualifications with a certain time limit after they've taken the money, then they have to pay it back. But if they get their facilities up to snuff, so to speak, as we would say in rural Oklahoma, then that's forgiven. I'm working with more members on something called the Livestock Risk Management Education Act. How do you use the marketing tools in order to protect yourself as a producer to make wise decisions? The people in the feedlots, the people in the processing plants, the distribution companies that take those products and move them to the supermarkets, they all use every conceivable marketing tool to protect themselves. How do we make sure our local producers can do that? Bottom line is this. There's a lot of efforts going on by myself and a number of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to try to make sure that we don't have another 2019 or another 2020 kind of a disruption. It's not fair to the consumers. It's almost killed economically some of our producers. We have to do differently. We have to do better. We're working hard on that. And as always, I look forward to the Farmers Union's support of these efforts as we persuade members who may not understand these issues as well as you and I do to support us and vote with us when we go to the floor of the United States House. Again, thank you for giving me the chance to participate and visit with you today. I look forward to continuing to work with you and with all of my colleagues in the United States House. We can do better. We've got legislation that will enable us to do better. We just have to get it to the President's desk for a signature. Thank you. Hello.
All right. As with the others, we really appreciate Congressman Lucas's leadership there, his awareness of many of the issues that are central to our members, and appreciate the remarks today. Alrighty, at this time, we are ready to wrap up, and I would just remind everybody, obviously, continue to make sure you're meeting your congressional meeting times, and that those meetings continue to go well. I've seen little snippets of the entertainment that we're expecting for the Thursday wrap-up. And then Thursday morning earlier, we do have another briefing that will be on the Postal Service. Feel free to jump into that if you want. And tomorrow, Wednesday at noon, we will have a signing of a memorandum of understanding with Manners, which is Minorities in Natural Resources and Related Sciences. Important events, the agenda, the schedule, all the details remain available on the nfu.org website. /fly-in. So again, thanks everybody for your time today, for your work and leadership this week. It really is making an impact and helps us advance all of our issues. So with that, thanks everybody, and I hope that the rest of the day and the week continues to go well. Take care.